I've always been in the mindset of my job is to get students a job. If I'm not able to support students and mentor them to get a job, fundamentally, I'm not doing my job. Particularly the last 5 or 6 years, I'd say the landscape has changed massively. Students or people wanting to get into PA sort of assure them really that you don't have to come from a traditional background. Empathy is massive, like understanding how those people tick, how they work, why they ask what they ask in terms of what you need to deliver from a performance analysis point of view, I think is fundamental. As you see students go into a really elite level environment, and it's like just rabbit in headlights, isn't it? It's like, what is going on here? And it's sort of shock and awe, it's sink or swim. So actually what you mentioned around just that constant turnover of people every year, it's completely counterproductive, because by the time you train them up, and then you've probably only got 4 months or 3-4 months of the season left, and then they're out. The days are long gone where you could just do a degree and then it's done.
Hello and welcome back to my channel, and today's guest is Dr. Matt Robbins, who has spent almost 20 years in higher education with a more recent focus on sports performance analysis. So Matt has taught and mentored lots and lots of students, many of which who have gone on to have amazing careers, whether that be at top sports clubs or sporting organisations. So I was very keen to get Matt on the channel to speak to him about all things university really, so kind of all things from the types of degrees that students should be thinking about, the types of things that they should be doing when trying to prepare for that kind of first job that they're after, you know, what universities can potentially do more of, how they can improve internships. We speak about how, you know, a role in performance analysis doesn't have to be just for people that come from the traditional sporting background. So there's loads of things to unpack in this conversation, and Matt is very, very kind to give lots of advice, which I think a lot of viewers to this channel will find very, very useful. So before we get into the interview, I want to quickly ask you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So if you like this type of content, please hit the subscribe button just below the video so you don't miss future ones just like this. And also I've got a totally free weekly newsletter where I send out insights into the analysis or sporting industry and tips on employment. So if that's your thing and you want to get that for free every week in your email inbox, just hit the link below the video to subscribe to the email newsletter. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Dr. Matt Robbins. Hi Matt, welcome to the channel. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really good, Chris. Thank you so much for inviting me on. Much appreciated.
No, really, I wanted to speak to, I've been meaning to speak to somebody from the kind of academic side, the university side for a while. Figured who better to speak to than yourself, Matt. So I gave a quick intro before the video started, but what I'd like to do first off is just pass it over to the guest. So for those that don't know who you are, just kind of who you are, what you're currently doing, just a little bit of background, and then we'll delve deeper into, you know, as we get through the video.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Dr. Matt Robbins. So I currently work at the University of Kent, based at Canterbury. Currently developing our undergraduate provision in performance analysis. Also supervise a number of PhD students. Been working in HE for sort of 15, 20 years. Tell by the white beard. So yeah, getting a little bit older now, but yeah, working in HE for over 15 years, specializing in sports performance analysis. And been really fortunate to have supported and mentored a large number of students that work in high performance sport or sort of allied professions.
Definitely. So that was one point I was probably going to make. In fact, you have probably over, you know, people that are working at the top level of the game at the moment, that probably kind of came through you at some point in terms of you were at Chichester for 10 years or so in terms of the master's program there. So I'm sure you kind of came across.
Yeah, so I stumbled into analysis in around 2007. So my background is actually, my PhD was in sports biomechanics. So looking at variability in sports performance, so looking at consistency. But then when I got my first lecturing job in 2007 at Nottingham Trent, it was during the good old sort of Prozone sort of era back then. And we had a number of clubs in the East Midlands that we were looking to build a relationship with, that came to us around performance analysis. And that's how I got into it, was supporting and mentoring students that way. So, and that's then sort of reflected in the academic experience, because it was almost sort of reverse engineering what the students were doing within a club, within an applied environment, and then how you can then translate that into an educational and learning experience. So I didn't come per se from a PA academic route. It was very much initially supporting the students, mentoring the students, and then developing the educational content from there. And like I say, yeah, that's how it developed from Trent. So we had an undergraduate provision at Trent at the time, and then we had an MRes in sports science, but then we developed a performance analysis pathway within that. We also, through collaboration with a guy called Mike Hughes, who I'm sure students would be aware of, sort of Hughes and Franks and all of the textbooks.
Yeah.
But I work with Mike, and Mike came up with the idea for the International Masters in Performance Analysis, which was known as IMPAS. So he kindly sort of offered that in terms of a framework and the links. And I coordinated that for a couple of years during my time at Trent, which was really nice because, again, it was an international experience based on collaboration of different sort of university partners. And then, in sort of 2012, moved to Chichester and 10 years there. And again, developed the provision in terms of PA. I suppose the sort of flagship element of PA there was the MSc. And as you mentioned, been really, really fortunate to have supported quite a large number of students now in terms of getting jobs in clubs or sort of fulfilling their aspirations. And that's sort of led me here to Kent, and third time to develop a provision. So really, really enjoying the challenge so far.
Very interesting. That's kind of where I first came to kind of first heard your name and kind of came about you, Matt, was when you were at Chichester, because I think, well, this is going back a long time for me, really. But when I was at Brighton, some of my colleagues there, which Nick Stanley, I think you'll know Nick, so he was on the Masters, wasn't he? So that's kind of one thing I want to speak about in terms of the partnership with clubs. So we'll touch on it later, because I think that's definitely an important kind of part of bridging the gap from a student being at uni and then obviously going on to be successful in the club setting. But so without making you sound a bit old here, Matt, so how do you feel? So
I am, don't worry.
Because you described all them, so like now you've probably got more experience in higher education than how old some of your students are these days. So you touched on 20 years experience, and again, you're getting these students.
For reminding me about that, Chris.
It's that great beard that you told me about before we started. Perfect. So so you're getting there's loads of these students coming in, and obviously they're learning from yourself in terms of this kind of near on kind of 2 decades worth of experience. So very valuable for them. So we've kind of skimmed through some of your roles there. So I think first kind of question on the back of that really is, what have you kind of seen as changes over the years, Matt? So we'll kind of focus more on PA here, performance analysis, in terms of that's my background, but where do you see how that's changed from when you first started kind of lecturing that to now?
Yeah, so I suppose if you sort of take it from like an applied point of view and then like an academic point of view, I think the beauty of analysis has always been access in terms of, people going out and being able to film. It's a very accessible discipline and profession. Yeah. So I think, the first thing I'd say and noticed is just how it's expanded from elite level all the way down to grassroots, like the number of grassroots teams, organizations, semi-pro clubs, just, and equally like the diversity in terms of sports now that use it. Before it tended to be, towards the, the upper levels of, professional sport, it tended to be sort of populated or sort of nucleated around certain sort of sports and sort of fields. So I think just the access for opportunity, and again, for students, I think that's really crucial, is that, and I'm sure we'll touch on this, but you don't have to get experience at the highest level. You can offer your services at a lower level, and that can be a really valuable sort of learning experience. So I think access, again, in terms of the sort of credence and I suppose the acceptance of the discipline, just the visibility of it, you see it all over Sky Sports, you see it in the media, you see it in broadcast, you see so many stuff online about it. So again, I think just that visibility's helped. But then, connecting then to how the university responds to that, just the diversity of roles, so when I started at Trent, it was sort of very much first team, pre-match, post-match. Then with the EPPP, particularly in football, you went through the sort of academy boom, because if you needed Cat 1, you needed a certain number of full-time staff and infrastructure and everything else. You then went through like the academy boom in terms of recruitment, in terms of then sort of scouting and that side. And then with the data, data engineers, data analysts, data visualization. So you've got those 4 key elements now. But again, equally for students, I think it's really important, or anyone in terms of whether at early, mid-career, the diversity of roles. So you've got like individual development analysts that work specifically with players in terms of one-to-one. You've got set piece analysts. You've got, there was a club at advertising the other year for a research analyst, which was like a 50-50. So it was, maybe supporting their pre-match or post-match process, but then the other part of their role was actually doing sort of medium to longer term research projects and things like that. And then you've got people like Nick, from Brighton, so Nick Stanley, that's moved more into the coaching side. and whether you have like a hybrid sort of technical coaching role, so you're half analyst, half coach, or whether you have a head of coaching methodology role or whatever it might be, or as in Nick's case, a set piece coach. So I think just the expansion of roles, and equally in response to all of that, and you'll be well aware, just the amount of software and hardware in terms of trying to keep track of it. So I think from an applied point of view, as you mentioned, it's expanding at such a rate. And then the key challenge then from an academic point of view is how do we respond to that? And it's been really, really interesting seeing the landscape change within academia over the last sort of, particularly 5-6 years. When I first started at Chichester, and another key part of my role, I've been really fortunate to be the external examiner for a number of different universities. So unlike schools where you've got like a government agency like Ofsted, universities will have external examiners from other universities that go in and quality assure their courses. And you sort of look at it from the outside. And again, from my point of view as an academic, you've got to be always really mindful of what that landscape looks like what courses are out there, what they do, what your angle might be. And when I started at Chichester, it was always looking like there would be more and more courses, and it didn't really happen. But now in the last 5 or 6 years, just the number of courses now that are doing it at undergraduate level, and not just doing it at undergraduate level in terms of like an isolated module, but they've got multiple modules now through year 1, year 2, year 3. The number of courses now that are coming online at postgraduate level, but equally like the variations in courses. You've got your traditional PA courses, but then you've also got the offshoots of that in terms of like your sports analytics courses, or your sports data science courses, or things like that. So like I say, particularly the last 5 or 6 years, I'd say the landscape has changed massively, and in a good way. I think competition and actually the diversity of it is a really, really positive thing.
Yeah, and just on the kind of data side as well, you've got people coming from non-sporting backgrounds with their degrees in data, just pure data, and they want to work into sport because they're seeing that the opportunities are now available. So yeah, it's very, very competitive, and there's a load of people that want to do it. But I think just casting back to my degree.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think that's a really, really good point. That I think either sort of students or people wanting to get into PA, sort of assure them really that you don't have to come from a traditional background.
Yeah, true.
And particularly, if you think of the diversity of students that I've had on the course at Chichester, yes, okay, the majority of those would come from a related degree, like a sports coaching degree, sports science degree. But actually the number of students that we've had coming from either engineering or maths or economics or PPE, so philosophy, politics, economics. We had, and I always mention him, and I'll sort of mention it in this video. We had a guy called Tom Gardner, who now heads up the performance analysis insights team within FIFA. He came from a French degree, and we interviewed him. But actually, from a PA point of view, we can teach the technical skills. We can teach the process, and actually, the key thing to bear in mind, and again, I'm sure we'll talk about it over the course of this, is those soft skills. That relationship building, that maturity, that self-awareness, that ability to reflect, that ability to work under pressure. So I think whether you're coming from an allied degree, like a sport degree, or if you're coming from something else, always think about what the related transferable skills are that will connect to that discipline, and just almost break that discipline down in terms of, what am I actually involved to do? And then what's the value added that I can provide? And, initially from Tom, Tom gave one of the strongest interviews I've ever done in terms of MSc. Because that sort of soft skill side, I knew I could put him into an elite environment, and the ability, again, to speak sort of multiple languages. So he was fluent in French, again, helps that relationship building. So, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's a really, really valuable point that you've made.
No, 100%. Because I get a lot of messages from people that aren't in sport, that found the video on YouTube and stuff, and they just think, I've got these skills of data, I work in finance, I work in whatever, but I really want to get in sport. Have I got a chance? And I think obviously, exactly how you've said there, is if you've got the skills that a club or an organization would need, and you can transfer them and know how you can benefit that particular organization, then 100% you don't need to have come from a sport background. So I mean, you touched upon it there in terms of those kind of soft skills really there, Matt. So other than, because I don't want to paint students in a bad light here. Like some students will go, they get their undergrad and they think that they're then ready. You know, they've done
Yeah.
the undergrad in analysis, and you know they think they're going to get out and go straight into a club and they're ready to work in that environment. But as you mentioned there, the soft skills are just as important. So can you just kind of expand on that a little bit in terms of what skills, aside from the coding, the filming, you know, the tactical knowledge, what would you say are very strong skills to have for a student looking to make that step into the world of working in elite sport?
Yeah, I think importantly, I think it comes under that umbrella of like EQ, like emotional intelligence.
Mm.
Like for me, again, going back to the sort of 10 years at Chichester, it's how can you try and understand people? You know, you're working with, within sport and elite sport, you're working with such a diverse range of personalities.
Yeah.
You know, if you sort of did a character profile on everyone, you'd probably get all ends of the, a particular spectrum in terms of all of the staff you'd work with within that multidisciplinary team. So I think sort of empathy is massive, like understanding how those people tick, how they work, why they ask what they ask in terms of what you need to deliver from a performance analysis point of view, I think is fundamental.
Yeah.
Because a coach might ask you to do something or might communicate in a certain way. And if you don't have that emotional intelligence to understand how or why they're communicating in the way, it can make those environments quite challenging. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And then equally, if you understand those people better, you can then vary and tailor your own communication style and your strategy. So you might speak to the physio slightly different to, the psychologist or the coach or the manager, or, and again, some coaches might be different. So I think that emotional intelligence and that empathy is massive. I think resilience is huge.
Yeah.
And again, from an academic point of view in a university, how do we prepare students to be resilient? I don't know what the average shelf life is in terms of career, in terms of how long people would stay in jobs within elite sport. You get some people that will stay with an organization for a long time, but that uncertainty in terms of managing the peaks and the troughs, in terms of wins, losses, changes of manager, the number of people that I've spoken to within industry, or even students, like early career sort of practitioners, might go through 2, 3, 4 managers within an 18-month or a 2-year window. And all of a sudden, those processes change, what the demands change, the expectations change, the communication strategies change, and that resilience to do that. You're looking at things like problem solving, initiative. You'll be well aware, and I'm well aware, you can set stuff up, things invariably go wrong.
Definitely.
and it's how you manage that. I think, again, the other thing that's really, really important, and one of the things I've tried to sort of go through with the students, is how can you try and future-proof yourself? So, how can you mentor people as well? So even if you're going into a club, you might be, so for instance, if you're a master's student, you might be in a club that you're helping to then manage undergraduate students that might support the weekend filming or whatever it might be. Do you know what I mean? And you're part of that chain once you've sort of bedded in.
Yeah.
So, that communication piece, that resilience piece, that problem solving, that initiative, and I think particularly within the culture within sport, that rapport and relationship building and knowing how you can interact with people is massive. Because again, you look at the migration of staff around clubs, and if a manager goes somewhere else, they'll see if they can take that person with them. It's a very, very trusted inner circle. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the challenge from an academic point of view, is how do we really tease those things out and support the students in developing that?
Yeah. So, I mean, because that kind of links to clubs in terms of, like, when you were at Chichester, for example. I'm not sure how it kind of looks at your current role, Matt, but when you were at Chichester, you had that link with Brighton. You probably had links with other clubs as well. So just kind of touch on the importance of that in terms of having that bridge, where the students are able to get hands-on experience while they are doing their degree, and kind of get exposed to some of them kind of things that you mentioned.
Absolutely. So I've always been in the mindset of my job is to get students a job. That's why they go to higher education. If I'm not able to support students and mentor them to get a job, fundamentally, I'm not doing my job. So, and it's a real challenge, and particularly now in terms of the volume of courses, in terms of trying to get those links. But again, when I was at Chichester, I was really fortunate to have really good sustainable links with clubs. So in football, we had, Southampton, Bournemouth, Brighton, Tottenham. So when Stu Metcalf was at Tottenham, we had really good links with Tottenham. Rugby, we had like Harlequins, and we did some bits and pieces with Duncan Locke at England Rugby. And then cricket, we had Sussex, Surrey, Hampshire, again, Surrey Storm netball. So I've always been in the mindset of, and lower league experience and sort of semi-pro amateur experience is absolutely fantastic. And we can potentially talk about the sort of strengths and sort of caveats to that. But I've always been the mindset of try and get the highest quality experience. So quality of experience is the paramount, but then try and get that at the highest level. And then if you can connect that in terms of theory to practice, and everything that I try and do from an educational point of view will be, how does that then relate to what you do within an applied setting? So if we're doing a bit of content that might seem theoretical, it's okay, what relevance does that have? And like you say, that practical learning, those links where they can go in, and that was the benefit for the masters. So they were in classes for a day a week, and they could go in then for intensive periods over that course of the season. And you're also seeing it day in, day out. So you can see the full cycle of things. You're working with those players, you're working with the coaches, you're embedded fully, you're developing those technical skills, but equally you're developing those soft skills as long as that's mentored correctly and they're thinking about the development of those skills, which I think is a really important point. But equally, what I call sort of organizational insight, like the culture within sport, is really, really valuable to get an insight into too. And sometimes I've had students that will go into that environment and then they go, oh, I don't know whether sport is right for me.
Right.
And and you can see almost like their self-identity, like they go, oh, for my whole sort of adolescent life into my adult life, I've always had this aspiration of working in sport, but I actually don't know whether that's right for me. And it's actually sort of mentoring and counseling those students to go, that's cool, like you don't need to do that. You can actually career pivot and go, okay, what are the really important things that you enjoy about that role? And actually you can go into a different profession that's still making use of those skills. And I think, again, that's a really important point to put, is that when you're getting that experience and bridging that gap between the theory and the practice, you're almost using it as like a confirmation exercise as well, as to whether that's the career for you and that's the environment for you. And if it isn't, what are those bits around that job that you really enjoy? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember my first day, because when I went to Sheffield Hallam, and at the time they had a 6-week placement, and I went to Sheffield United in their academy for that 6 weeks. So obviously I'd done a bit of in the classroom. I knew how to do the coding, etc., the filming. But then it wasn't until that first day that I walked into the training ground, and you had to do something with the academy manager or the under-18s coach. Like that is just, you can't really learn that at uni. But that's, like you say, it's massive, and like you don't really know until you're in there and in that position. So yeah, 100%. I mean, I suppose it really leads.
That's where that resilience and that, and also going back to the soft skills, people have got to be really logical. Do you know what I mean? When you're asked for things, or when you're working in that intense environment, you've got to think clearly. Do you know what I mean? You can't panic and go, oh God, what do I need to do now? And that logical mindset of how you look through things, how you process things, how you can go through that, I think is really important as well. And like you say, because particularly in analysis, you might not get a huge amount of time before stuff comes in. And it might be, the coach or the manager might go, oh, I need this and I need it in like an hour, or I need it this afternoon. And then you've got to go, okay, how do I prioritize that with everything else? How do I manage expectations as well? Because I think managing expectations is massive. And again, it goes back to that communication piece. But how can you just take a step back and just be logical and reflect on, okay, how do I manage everything? Because if not, that particularly, I'd say the first sort of 3-4 months, you see students go into an environment like a Brighton or, a really elite level environment. And it's like just rabbit in headlights, isn't it? It's like, what is going on here? And it's sort of shock and awe. It's sink or swim. But it's then making sure that support structure is around the students, that they know that they've got an outlet either into the club in terms of a mentor. And again, I've been really fortunate with the clubs that we've been fortunate to link with, but equally from a university side, they know that they've got a trusted mentor and stuff that they can just access when they need in terms of supporting them. Because if not, if they're left to their own devices, it can be a real challenge for them.
So I mean, that does lead on to kind of that bridge from learning to working in terms of the current state of the job market, really, in terms of internships, etc. So I just want to get your opinion on internships, Matt, really. So again, it seems like, whether right or wrong, everyone that's in a job at the moment went through a period of working for, unpaid, working for free in an internship position. What's your general thoughts on that? Is it something that you think is okay? Is it something like, how do you what's your opinion on internships and unpaid work, really?
It's to be honest, it's a little bit of a minefield,
Yeah.
because you've got, and the government and HMRC came out and tried to clarify sort of internships, and I suppose the difference between work placements and what's, I suppose, known officially as internships. And I think people sort of use that word internship sort of interchangeably between sort of work placement opportunities and internships, and I think first and foremost, the challenge that we've got is how can we provide that really high quality experience that we've mentioned.
Yeah.
And the challenge that universities got is how can we try and provide that high quality experience and applied, because, again, in terms of employability, universities are massively under under pressure in terms of employability statistics and everything else. And that will be even more so going forward with sort of government policy. But how do we do that on scale? You might have 30 students on a module, you might have 100 students on a module, you might have 50 students that do a year in industry. How do you cater to that volume? So I suppose to set a sort of prefix, the landscape has changed massively over the last, I'd say 10 years in particularly during my time when I first started at Chichester in 2012. Back then, no one paid anything in terms of when they were on placement.
Yeah.
Now there's some really, and I want to highlight the good practice as well. There's some really outstanding practice going on within certain areas and certain clubs where they will pay a salary. They'll, the student, if it's like a 1-year master's, they'll be on a fixed wage. There'll be a salaried member of staff and they're remunerated well.
Yeah.
But like you say, then, okay, that's probably the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
So I think that transparency and it being university focused in terms of the opportunity, and then also the transparency in terms of what is that work placement going towards. So is it for a particular module? How many credits is that module? Whatever, so you're managing the expectations from all sides.
Yeah.
Do I wish that everyone paid a fair wage in terms of opportunity? Absolutely. But equally, and again, particularly because of performance analysis, because of how accessible it is it viable that you've got a non-league club that can pay, for salary? So I think it's not an ideal situation.
Yeah.
I think, the landscape is certainly better, and a lot of opportunities that you see now, are, offer fees, in terms of whether it's master's fees or something like that. But I think in terms of, as long as the transparency is there in terms of, and the universities are pushing for the clubs to give financial remuneration, I think that's key. We need to drive standards. We can't just put it on the clubs to go, do what you can. So I think it's moving absolutely in the right way. I think there's a lot of good practice. I think the university sector generally, from me, can put a bit more pressure on clubs. But the key challenge will always be, how can you provide applied opportunities? How can you provide them on scale? Yeah. But equally, that equity of access, equality of opportunity is a real challenge, because you don't want to have it that people are doing it just because they can afford to do it. Do you know what I mean? So it's really affecting sort of less privileged students.
Yeah, I agree. I think because there's kind of a couple of different areas in that. So obviously, you kind of mainly touched on there is kind of going into clubs while you are studying. So, as part of a placement or that. But we've all seen the adverts of jobs that aren't linked to a uni, they aren't linked to a course. Yeah. It's just an internship where they're asking you to do a job. Effectively, it is a job, but they just don't want to pay you. And I think that's the gripe with a lot of people in terms of, my opinion is, I think unpaid work in general is not terrible if it's done right. Like, I think in terms of, if there's a clear plan, if you are going in and you're not getting paid, then it should be a learning experience. If I go in as an intern, for me, I should be having the opportunity to learn from the analyst that's already in that position, and I use that, I can benefit from that. But the way that some clubs will just kind of just churn an unpaid guy, move on to the next one, get another one in,
Yeah.
and then again, and there's never ever an opportunity for that person to get a job at that club, and it's just a case of, and that's just filtered down, like you say, like non-league clubs or lower league clubs. They're, I mean, if the Premier League clubs aren't paying some people, then why would a non-league club pay for them? You know what I
No.
mean? And I think that's
And that's and I think that I completely agree. And I think again, the sort of challenges, it's supply and demand, right? So
mm,
the supply of jobs is not high. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean? There's
yeah,
not, but the demand, in terms of people trying to get into there
yeah,
is massive. So, but equally, I completely get it. I completely understand, and I completely share your view. Is that if it's not linked to a course and there's not that transparency in terms of, you know, credits or what it's going towards or what have you, or how it's supporting that sort of education experience, if it's completely separate, then there needs to be a much sort of tightening in terms of sort of, don't want to use the word regulation, but how it's managed.
yeah,
Because like you say, it's not great. Again, the key thing is you look at some of the highest achieving clubs now,
mm,
not just in football, but in other sports. They've got a real clear purpose. They've got a real clear philosophy. They see medium and long term as well as short term. So that vision has changed.
mm,
Before, when I was at Trent and early in Chichester, if managers went, a lot of their backroom staff would go as well.
yeah,
Now, because of the critical mass of staff, and actually teams now have got their sort of game model, their team identity, whatever you want to call it. They've got their vision of how everyone needs to work, the values that everyone buys into. That continuity of staff is really important. So
mm,
actually, what you mentioned around just that constant turnover of people every year, it's completely counterproductive, because by the time you train them up,
yeah,
it might take 6 months to fully train them up and get that person settled. And then
mm,
you've probably only got 4 months or 3, 4 months of the season left, and then they're out.
yeah,
And then you've got to go through that process. And actually, the time investment in terms of recruiting that person, onboarding them, making sure,
yeah, yeah, I
is
agree.
really challenging. So
Yeah,
actually, for me, I would say it's detrimental to the club, because
mm,
you can't develop a real sustainable ethic
yeah,
and that continuity if every 12 months you're changing over the people. The
mm,
other thing I think is really important to mention, and we talked about like the accessibility of PA, if finance is a barrier, what's the remote work opportunities?
yeah,
Because again, when we talked about like the growth of analysis, like it's massive in this country, but actually globally, analysis now,
mm,
and again, it's not just in North America, it's not just, it's all over Europe, South America, Australasia, everywhere, just the development of it. So don't cast your net really narrow where you're just thinking locally or regionally. Again, through LinkedIn, or we're in such a connected world now. Can you do remote work where you don't have to travel? Yes, you're doing the work,
mm,
but actually there's no travel costs, there's no, things. And even again, from an educational point of view, don't think that you have to do face-to-face stuff. You can do remote work, you can do virtual meetings. Again, you're not getting, you're not in there.
mm.
But actually, if you want to get some insight, if you want to develop your portfolio in terms of work produced, explore remote opportunities as well. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
No, I do agree. Spoke to a few people about that. I think that's kind of, it does seem like that's a growing trend, like the kind of freelancer kind of, going out and if you've got the skills of, let's say you're really good at doing X and Y, you can consult with various different clubs and you can do,
Yeah.
you can do that and you can earn a living very well doing that. So I think, yeah, some younger students probably are a bit unaware of that, where the only opportunity they think exists is working as an analyst in a club, whereas that's definitely
Mm.
not the case. There's so many different ways you can take it. I think in terms of like that link, then it's still on the link from uni to clubs. I might be wrong in saying this because obviously I've not really been involved in the uni courses for a long time, but I feel like it would be a benefit to the students on the courses if there is, if you can get kind of people in almost like alumni, where you bring in someone that's been there and worked at a club and learn from them, and then it's more of a, okay, this guy was on my course, the same course, I know that he's gone through this path, I can learn from that. And also
Mm.
just getting more almost like guest lectures where you can get analysts from various sports and clubs to come in and spend time with the students. I don't know if you do that or if you've thought about doing that, just in case of kind of
Yeah,
bringing it out further.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely, completely agree. The guest lectures side, we've done for, since I started. So we'd get different people in. Again, exposure to different sports, different roles, but also people that have got different approaches in terms of their thinking. I think sometimes, and again, if we think of it from whether it's a student point of view or even sort of an early mid-career person that might have only been at one or two clubs, sometimes you can fall into the trap of going, that's the way to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And you go, okay, I've had a year at Southampton or I've had a year at Arsenal, whatever it might be. Okay, that's how it's done. And then the number of students that then go to somewhere else and go, oh, Jesus Christ, okay, it doesn't have to be done that way. there's a variation. So I think getting that variation and insight in terms of, we're all pretty much doing the similar stuff, but actually some of the processes will be different. Some of the things that you look at will be different. How it's delivered might be different. So I think getting that coverage, so in terms of guest lectures, I think is really, really good. And I'll sort of touch on that in a sec. The other thing that we used to do, which I sort of, again, because of that success of that master's course when I was there, we produced like an alumni sort of profile. So we had, a big old document of people, and I've got, I don't know, 20, 25 people to fill it out, both within performance related roles within sport, but also allied sort of professions. So people that then might have gone into coaching or gone into teaching or worked for a tech company. So, people that might have gone into information lab and, or data school and gone down the Tableau sort of data viz and gone down that as a data analyst sort of consultant route. And we put that together, and then we'd put their LinkedIn profile, and I'd try and connect those students with that alumni. And I think it's really important. Just taking that a step further. And I think, again, for me, this is an area where HE could develop, and particularly within PA, but there are challenges with it, is how can you try and create a much more collaborative experience between industry and university? So rather than just getting them in for guest lectures, how can you try and embed these people from, like, how can I try and get Nick from Brighton in more to actually mentor the students? How can I get him to help with the assessment of the students? How can I help him, get him in to help with how we design the curriculum? So I think there could be, we've got a duty to go out and see what industry needs, and we need to align our curriculum to that. But actually, how can we have a lot more of an integrated curriculum between industry and academia? I think for me, and if I was to do a postgraduate course or do something at Kent, and again, we've got ambitions to establish our presence very much within the sector, taking the really good practices that I've done elsewhere. But one of my things is, well, how can I try and create that much more collaborative thing? Because if we're getting industry experts in, I don't want just them in for an hour. But again, it's how do you then manage that around their other commitments? Because
very hard, because obviously they're very, very extremely busy when their seasons on and the students on. So, but no, I think that would just, because you basically answered the question I wanted to ask was kind of what thing would you say unis in general can improve on? And I think that is a great answer in terms of the integration more so with the working world, really, in terms of if it's embedding people in there for more than just a guest lecture and kind of getting the students used to it. So perfect. So in terms of one thing here, keeping up with kind of the trends of the, and again, analysis based, we'll focus just on analysis. So as you will know, everyone will know, technology is changing a lot. What clubs want now is way different to what clubs wanted 3 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. So you seem pretty kind of in there in terms of speaking with analysts. You've got those connections. How do you ensure, and how can maybe other unis ensure that they are keeping up with it? Because again, if I go to uni now as an undergrad, I'm not graduating for 3 years. The landscape will have changed in 1 year, never mind 3. So how do you kind of maximize that kind of keeping up with the trends and making sure that you mentioned future proofing earlier as well, and there's things like AI that are being used in different roles now. How would you ensure that students are ready when they come to you, that they're going to be ready in 4 years and they're not going to be out, the skills aren't going to be outdated?
To be honest, it's a challenge. I think, and particularly, I suppose, again, to set a context, universities can't make, so for instance, I can't make massive changes to the course or the modules like immediately. It needs to go through what we call like a validation process, or I need to get approval through different levels of the university.
Yeah.
If I again going back to sort of the master's course at Chichester, if I needed to make massive changes, it might take a year or 2 years for that to roll out because of then the marketing, advertising, whatever. So unfortunately, universities aren't necessarily as agile or responsive as we could be. However, I think if you, and I suppose this is where my sort of logical brain comes in, if you strip down what analysis is, it's just one big like learning intervention. You're just providing feedback, whether it's video or data. So from an educational experience, how do you then prepare students in terms of how do you collect that data at varying levels? What sort of information could you collect? Like you say, that's evolved. So how can you keep up with trends in terms of some of the metrics or things that you might want to look at? How can you ensure like the integrity of that information? And then you've then got almost like the delivery and the communication piece, right? So it's how do you then deliver that information in what varying ways? And then how do you communicate that in terms of a feedback strategy or a learning strategy, whatever it might be. So despite how quickly analysis moves, I think universities need to be really mindful of what the key ingredients of that journey are. And again, the challenge that universities have got is, we don't have an infinite budget to buy infinite, software licenses. So, within our resources, and that's again where those applied experiences come in, because they're, particularly like Premiership, Championship clubs, for instance, in football, are going to have that resource in terms of licenses, hardware, whatever it might be. So I think if you can understand what that journey should be in terms of the fundamentals of the discipline, and then, regardless to what software package you use, I'd like to think there's transferable things between one package and another, and there's so many out there now. But equally, if you also then create an environment for the students where they're going through that journey, but then through either the curriculum or the assessment or the mentoring, you're getting them to evaluate and sort of understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And if you can couple that, hopefully with applied experience, that's great. But like you say, there has been sort of shifts in terms of, particularly down like the data viz route. Some courses have been doing data viz for a while, all of the Tableau, Power BI stuff. But I think the key thing with that, and equally with, whether you're using a PA bit of software as well, you've got to understand why you're using it and why you're designing it in that way. So for instance, you might see a dashboard created on Tableau, but actually, why have you used that chart? Why have you designed it in that way? What's the clarity of the story? Do you know what I mean? And for me, that's where universities can be really powerful, because even though the discipline changes quite quickly, if you understand what the ingredients are, and then you challenge the students through the curriculum, assessment, or whatever to keep, critiquing that process, I think it puts them in good stead. I hope that answers your question. I've not gone on a tangent.
No, that's fine. That was good. So, I mean, for those that aren't connected with you on LinkedIn, Matt, I would advise you do, because the next thing I want to touch on is some of the recent posts you've done in terms of, I've made a few bullet points here. So you did a post on kind of reflection as a kind of student and kind of the professional identity. There was one about strengths and weaknesses as well, linked to kind of if you get asked that question. So just if you want to kind of touch upon why, the reason for kind of doing these posts, and also if you want to kind of delve into a particular one of them and kind of expand on one, that would be great.
And I think it goes back to one of the things universities do really well. And, I've been really, I've not been as active, I haven't been active on LinkedIn for a long, long time. And that's for a number of different reasons. I don't like, which is weird because the profession I'm in, I don't like necessarily being in the spotlight. And obviously this podcast is probably a little bit counter to what I'd normally do. But universities generally are very good in terms of the technical skills, in terms of, can they film, can they code, can they do X? If you imagine everyone that's going to go, get shortlisted for a job, as a case in point, we were really fortunate about 3 years ago now, lose track of time, for one of our master students at the, when I was the program leader at Chichester, to get a first team job at a really high level Premier League club, like sort of Champions League, competed for the, for the Premiership last year. And there was about, I don't know, nearly 1,000 applicants for that job by all accounts.
Yeah.
So if you think of that level of competition, and if you think of the caliber of people that are going to get shortlisted for that job, everyone is going to be able to tick that box in terms of being able to do the job, else you won't get shortlisted.
Yeah.
So then you've got to think of, okay, how do I then exceed those criteria? Like, what value can I add? So going back to the sort of, the reflective practice, it's all sort of intertwined. When you submit your CV, how can you sell you on that, in terms of your values, your beliefs, like I say, your professional identity, how you think analysis should be done? How can you communicate and articulate your strengths and sell that to that club? How can you demonstrate that you can fit within that organization, you understand them, and you can fit within that culture? So I think for me, and again, it's an area that I personally believe that universities could do better at, and it's something that I've tried to do over the last sort of 10, 15 years, is how can you try and prepare students thinking, not just for the short term, but how can you prepare it for the long term? Yeah. Like how do we prepare students not for just trying to get the job now, but to try and prepare their thinking in terms of their lifelong learning journey or their career journey.
Yeah.
So, and if you imagine, if you go for that interview, if you're if you've developed your reflective skills so that you've got a really good understanding of your strengths and weaknesses, you can articulate that to those people in front of you. You can sell how you can hit the ground running, how you can sort of complement the existing staff base. Do you know what I mean? How you can drive the analysis forward. What ideas have you got? What creativity have you got to push that forward? Because no one wants someone that can just tick the box and just do what they're already doing. And I think, unfortunately, the landscape has changed within PA specifically, in that you can't just tick the boxes now and you get the job. You've got to go above and beyond, and you've got to have your own angle. You've got to have your own niche in terms of how you can maybe fill an expertise gap within the club. So it might be that you can do something that maybe, they don't necessarily have that expertise there, or how can you complement what they do? And I think you do that by having that professional identity. Like, what do you stand for? How do you want to operate? And then what's the value added piece? And I think if you've got a really good sense of that, it means that you can communicate that to people. And equally, a lot of stuff within analysis is about buy-in with coaches, buy-in with players. And if you've got that, hopefully it will help with that rapport and that relationship building as well. So I think for me, it's absolutely massive. It doesn't only help you get your first job, but it helps you in terms of career progression. And I think, and it's, for me, it's a massive part of the jigsaw.
Yeah, because that was a point I wanted to speak about. Because personally, I'm not probably the best place to say this, but I do feel like unis could do more in getting people prepared, even if it's something as simple as CV or interview practice with an analyst and a director of football, or what to expect in that situation. Because again, like I get sent lots of CVs from students, and to be honest, the majority of them are not very good. Do you know what I mean? No. Like in terms of the CV. So like that's an easy, like it's not hard to make a good CV if you're taught how to, or you look. So I feel like there's lots of.
And the irony of it is, Chris, is the people that will send those CVs will invariably have presentation, creativity on their CV listed as skills or qualities. But then their CV doesn't reflect that. So if then you as an employer are challenging those things straight away, because if they're putting presentation skills, creativity on their CV, but their CV doesn't reflect that, you then question everything else around their CV.
100%. I said this so many times. Like I remember when I was doing my CV back, and it was designed like, because obviously we were at the time designing things like match reports. That's one thing that you would do, like these templates and stuff. So it is an outlet for you to show how you can design something, and the tools now that are available to design, you don't need to be an expert on Photoshop or something. Like there's literally stuff you can make a fantastic CV in like 20-30 minutes and just kind of tweak that. So I think there's a lot of quick wins that unis could do, like one being that in terms of like, as well, I know not everyone asks for a cover letter, but the majority of people don't even know what a cover, like how to write a cover letter, in my opinion. Like the cover letters we receive, and it's just like things like that. And then it's hard to prep for, interviews are kind of a nerve-wracking situation to be in. Like it's hard to kind of say, we did this at uni and I'm now clued up on interviews, but you can practice those kind of things. It's such an
important skill, and I suppose we did that at, again, the master's course I developed and wrote at Chichester, we had, as part of our work placement module, they had to, I'd come up with a hypothetical job. So I'd bring together tons and tons of job applications from different sports. And then based on the sport of interest for that student, so it could be netball, could be hockey, could be rugby, could be football, they would then get a job advert. And then what they then had to do is they had to respond to that job advert, submit a CV, submit a cover letter. And then the cover letter was really important because, again, people don't necessarily maybe request a cover letter. They just want your CV.
Yeah.
But actually, that cover letter as an assessment provides a really valuable opportunity for them to reflect on who they are, what they can do, and how they can sell that with a lot of intent.
Yeah.
And then we also used to, do an interview, and we used to do it as like a dragon's den. There'd be like 3 or 4 of us in terms of academic staff on the panel. So we try and make it, they would have to come suited and booted so it'd feel real.
Yeah.
And just really nicely, they loved it. But I used to have a camera literally over my shoulder and we'd record it. Yeah. And then they had to go back and reflect on it.
That's really
good. And then we gave them. And then the other thing, just to link into what you said, is the other assessment that we had to do was a reflective piece. But within that, and it links into that professional identity thing, is based on their reflections, they then had to come up with almost like a framework or a summary of then how all of their experiences fed into now what they thought their professional identity was. So again, it's just, like you say, it's really quick wins. It's a challenge on scale if you've got a large number of students because it takes time. But actually, if you've got smaller cohorts or if you can manage the logistics of it, those sort of authentic things are just massive, and it puts the students in such good stead. There's such key skills to have.
Yeah, because the CV one, especially to me, is so simple because if what you said about the job with 1,000 applicants, there are like jobs literally do get several hundred applications for analysts, and if you've got to go through that many CVs, you are, whether rightly or wrongly, you are going to do some skimming, and if you just skim and it's just boring or it doesn't grab your attention, you're not going to remember that CV. But if it's good, well structured, well set out, it's in your mind then as the person that's going to hire that position. So it's just massive for me. So perfect. So lots of things to kind of unpack there. But in terms of then where to go next, so let's kind of go. You mentioned strengths and weaknesses, and obviously interviews came up there. One thing I'd like to ask is the question. When you're in an interview and someone ask you for your strengths and weaknesses, your strengths is a pretty easy thing to answer, in my opinion. You can say some strengths and why you're good at them. How would you advise someone to answer, if you're in an interview and someone say, what's your weakness? What would you say? How can a student kind of navigate that question, obviously correctly, without making them sound that they're not right for the job? Or do you know what I'm trying to say? So how would you say, what would you advise on that kind of question if that came up in the interview?
The challenge with interviews is just sort of generally is interviews are a real skill, and I'm not professing to be the best at them by any stretch, but you have to. There's a couple of things people need to be mindful of, and especially students when they go into these environments. Is one is obviously about the answer, but two is how you frame or layer that answer. It's like the story that you tell, and I think sometimes, particularly students, they get caught up with trying to answer the question. And they'll say stuff and they might say it before they've properly thought about the question. So you see the number of students sort of jumping in and going and answering a question before they've probably thought about, But equally, going back to what we said about having that awareness of strengths and weaknesses, if you've really got that self-awareness of yourself, you know those things straight away. So you can then think about how you can frame or layer that answer. So my key advice in terms of weaknesses would be, really, really study that job descriptor. Like, it's impossible to be an expert in everything. If you think of all the different skills that are required to be an analyst, you cannot be brilliant at everything. It's impossible. You cannot be a feedback expert. You cannot be a data viz expert. You cannot have, an exceptional level of game understanding. You can't have exceptional technical skills, all at once. There's got to be some sort of gaps. So again, if you understand what the component parts are, and equally, if you then really study the job spec and go, okay, right, I don't know, say for sake of argument, game understanding is a weakness. But then what you might do is then highlight how your level of game understanding has helped in your previous roles or whatever it might be. So give some evidence. So you almost flip it into a strength. So you say what it is, But then you think of, okay, right, how can you demonstrate your capability with that? But then equally, what sort of support, what sort of mentoring, what sort of courses, what sort of training do you need to do to then develop that? So I think one thing is admitting the weakness. Like, everyone's got them, so it's fine. Don't be afraid to say what they are.
Yeah.
But then how you structure that answer in terms of how you frame it and how you can give evidence that, you're still good in that area, but it's maybe just not the level that you'd want. But then also, how can you then demonstrate that self-awareness to go, okay, what's my short, medium, longer term sort of drivers in terms of addressing this? So it might be going on a, UEFA B license or A license or whatever they are now. Yeah, level 3, level 4, whatever they are.
Yeah.
So I think one is, don't be afraid. Everyone's got weaknesses. 2, absolutely fundamentally make sure you know what they are. And 3, consider really how you frame and that narrative and that story. So how can you demonstrate evidence that you're okay in that area, so it's not a massive deficiency, so people won't look at it negatively. And equally, how can you demonstrate where the gaps might be, but also what support you might need when you're in there. And that's just an example.
Yeah, definitely. Because not all interviews are the same, but a lot of the questions that interviewers ask are similar. So you can, if you've got an interview, for any student out there, if you've got an interview, you can just go online and look at common interview questions and just have in your mind what you will want to say and reflect that back to your CV and the skills that you've got. So if you are prepared, at least if you half expect, if you ask me a question in an interview and I kind of already knew you might ask me that, Matt, I'm probably going to answer it better and more calmly. So that can make a massive difference. And I think if you do that as well, you are a lot less flustered and you are more confident, because I think it might have been Luke at Brentford I asked, because I asked him a question. Obviously, he interviews people, obviously, to bring them in as analysts, and he, like a lot of others, it's not just about the skills that you've got. It's also, will you fit into the group of already? Will you fit in? Are you a right fit? Will they kind of see you as a person that they will get along with? Because they're going to have to spend too many hours a week with you. To be honest, it's about getting your personality.
You see those people far more than you see your families, unfortunately. And again, that's the thing that they don't necessarily, people don't appreciate. But if you think, particularly with some of the calendars that you've got, you might be in a hotel with someone on Christmas Eve, or Christmas Day. If you've got a Boxing Day fixture, I know the fixtures are a lot kinder now than they were back in the day. But analysts would be traveling up and down the country, or during holidays or whatever it might be, going away on tours. And I think you've made a really, really valuable point, again, just generally in terms of interviews, is let down your barriers. Like, people don't want to see the interview version of you. They want to see you. And equally, your character, your personality, and it's, and you'll always, within an interview, you'll always get like, tell me about yourself. Tell me about why you want this job. Tell me how you can do the job. They're the 3 things generally, and you'll get a load of questions around those sort of 3 themes. But it's basically, who are you? Why do you want this job? And how can you demonstrate that you can do that job? If you can go in prepared for all 3 of those things and really do your research. But like you said, the number of students I've had that have got jobs because they've been able to sell them as a person, it's massive. And like you say, the more exposure you get to those sorts of environments, the more comfortable you are with yourself around how you can do that job. Is paramount. And equally, the number of students I've had that, there might be a job at Man United, or there might be a job at Man City, and before they see that badge and they go, it's completely impossible for me to get a job there. Because they see the prestige of the club, they see the history, they see the badge. But then when you work with them, and if you're able to provide them with that level of experience within, an elite environment or whatever it might be, or you break it down and go, look, actually, you're doing this job, but just in a different environment. And if you, again, completely strip it down, it builds them with confidence that they can actually go into that environment and sell themselves. And I think, again, just generally, without going off at a tangent, just demything some of that stuff of, don't worry about the badge. Like, if you can tick those boxes, if you can demonstrate you can add value, go for it. Like, be put off by a job because it's at X club. And again, it's just supporting the students and mentoring to them to go, okay, let's break down the job advert. Let's break down what they want. Okay, can you do that? And what evidence have you got to support that? Okay, and like you say, going back to your weaknesses, where are your gaps? Okay, right, okay. How do we paint that in terms of how do we then either address that, or how can we then communicate that back to them? And it doesn't matter what the badge is. You're going in for a role, and if you're the right person, amazing. Do you know what I mean? And I think some people get defeated before they've even applied because they go, oh, it's just above me. I don't know if you sort of share that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just again, like what people will probably not even consider is if you're in an interview, you've already kind of going back. If there's 500 applications, they're not going to interview 500 people. So you've already met their criteria of skill-wise. This guy's probably good enough to do the job. Let's see what he's like. How he comes across, how he sells himself, how he shares his vision, his identity, etc. So, in the interview, they're not there to really catch you out. They know you're probably suitable. They're just trying to tweak and get the perfect one, really. So, definitely don't forget about that. So, I think one thing I do like to add, to be honest, we've covered a lot of advice anyway, Matt, but I just want to kind of caveat this for two things. So, one is if you're speaking to somebody that's not even joined uni yet, so maybe they're just finishing college and they want to do your course, let's say, or they want to do an analysis course. The first part of the question would be advice for those kind of people. And then the second would be for someone that is coming to the end of their degree, whether it be sports analysis or, sports science, and they want to take that next step and actually get employed. So first one, not even started uni yet. Second one, just kind of coming to the end.
Okay. So advice for those just joining or, thinking about university. Make as much of an informed decision as you can. It sounds like a stupid question, but open days, when people go to open days, invariably you'll get a feeling when you walk around a campus, or it's like when you buy a house or when you see a car, you can't explain it. You just get a good feeling, don't you, about the place? It's the energy, it's the people, it's the conversations that you have. So I think being informed is the first bit of advice I'd give in terms of, not just the course, not just sort of the UCAS points that you need, but, because the UCAS points isn't everything in terms of, a course that requires 3 A stars isn't infinitely better than a course that needs an A and 2 Bs or 3 Bs, whatever it's going to be. So make sure the environment, the opportunity, so I think if you strip it down, universities provide 3 things, right? So they provide expertise in terms of staff. They provide resource, so like equipment, like as part of the teaching, and they provide opportunity. So it's like expertise of staff. It's what have they got in terms of equipment or resource to support you, and then what opportunities have they got. And if you can choose a course that you think for you in that environment can satisfy all 3 of those things, go for that. So I think for those people that want to go to uni, they're 3 really important things to think about.
Yeah, because I think when you're very young at that stage, and it's hard to even think about your career. You just make decisions based on. Some people make decisions on, is it a good night?
It's geography. Geography, whatever it might be. And again, it's and I'm probably sort of overthinking it, because when you think of maybe an 18-year-old, they probably don't think of those things. But equally, if you're going to do a sport degree, think about what things you might want to do. And again, we've talked a lot about HE, and I won't get on my soapbox around sort of, career advice for sort of 17, 18-year-olds. But, when you go to a uni, think around what opportunities you might want to do. So, if you want to go down strength and conditioning, or if you've got an interest in analysis, or, see what's being showcased, so when people come to Kent, what opportunities have we got? Don't be afraid to speak to the staff and see what they do, see what they're interested in, see what links they've got, because it's only through speaking to us as staff when that expertise, that resource, that opportunity becomes available. So don't be afraid to sort of, go to a place more than once. Do you know what I mean? And see what you might want to do, because like you say, sometimes it comes down to geography. It comes down to, do people want a big city experience, or do they want like a much more smaller personal type approach? So I think equally, just work out what you want from an experience, and then once you know that, what sort of, like I say, expertise, what have they got in terms of the uni, what opportunities have they got? Because ultimately, it isn't cheap to come to uni. It's really expensive now. Well, I say really expensive, they've got the tuition fees and then the cost of living. So the key thing is value for money. And I suppose because I've worked in HE, I've never been pretty much anywhere other than HE. If I was with my children, it would be, are they going to be, can they see themselves there? Is it a good environment? Is it a really collegiate environment? And like I say, what have they got to then support my son or daughter, academically, but equally, like, what have they got personally in terms of like student support and well-being and stuff like that? So, but ultimately, if you're just joining, just absolutely make the most of it. Like, just be a sponge, take every opportunity that you've got, without wanting to sound really cliche. That was that Richard Branson quote, wasn't there? Of like, if you're given an opportunity, say yes, and then just work out how to do it later. So the learning curve will be steep, but just, the days are long gone where you could just do a degree and then it's done. You've got to think about the broader collective experience of what a university offers you, and just try and take as much opportunity that you've got, and just don't have any regrets, really.
Yeah, perfect. Good answer. And then the next stage, then, someone coming to the end of the degree, what would you say for those guys trying to looking to get into their first job or first experience of the working world?
I suppose my main bits of advice, one is perseverance.
Definitely.
It's massive. And equally, I've had a number of students that are now working at the highest level as analysts, that it took them 3, 6, 12 months to do that.
Yeah.
But they kept persevering, they kept applying, they kept demonstrating their passion and their interest for that discipline. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be that perseverance. And don't panic. Like, do you know what I mean? Equally, university is just the start of your journey. So, when you get a job, that, you haven't finished then. That's like the start of your professional journey. So, see it as like a lifelong thing, if that makes sense, again, without wanting to be really sort of cheesy and sort of cliche. The other thing as well is, and you'll see, and part of this, the reason for the podcast is, potentially because I started sort of posting stuff online a bit more. But how can they demonstrate a bit more of an online digital presence in terms of post there, in terms of, visibility? So again, particularly if they're looking to get into an industry and it hasn't quite worked out yet, yes, you're going to maybe do part-time or full-time work to keep yourself, financially stable while you're still doing that. But can you still do bits on the side? Can you try and get access to data? Can you try and get access to video? Can you contact companies to try and do things? And can you build that online presence? Now, the challenge is again, that has changed massively in the last 12 months, 24 months. I don't know if you agree, but there are tons and tons of people now that are posting. I'll go on my LinkedIn feed, and all of a sudden I've got like about 200 posts of like, and people, and some of it's really good stuff, but people will sometimes post 3, 4 things a day. Do you know what I mean? Like, the appetite for it is massive. So equally, if you're going to post stuff online, what angle can you put on it? How can you make it a little bit different? Do you know what I mean? Like, to make it stand out, because there's so much noise out there. It's how do you get seen through that noise? So I think, perseverance is key. Trying to demonstrate an online or a digital presence and that visibility. Networking is everything. Like, if you can make the positive impressions with people, having that network is, again, we're going back to interviews. Some of those people that will be interviewed is because that club have phoned up someone and they've just been, they go, oh, Chris has applied. What's he like? And they'll go, oh yeah, he's incredible. He does X, Y, and Z. He did this brilliantly. He had ownership of X and he really drove it. All of a sudden, you've bypassed those 500, 800 applications and you're in. Yes, your CV ticks those boxes, but then that endorsement and that recommendation is everything. So don't for one second believe that sort of there's 7 degrees of separation, because there ain't. Like,
that's so true. Yeah, definitely.
It's, I'm fortunate, again, because of that, being in it for nearly 20 years, if someone applied to the uni, or if I was working in a club or whatever, I'd like to think either between one person or 2 people, I could find out about that person. And if if there wasn't one person I could correct directly, I would know someone who would know that person that I would contact. So it's such an incestuous world. Everyone knows everyone. So, perseverance, online presence, networking. And then I suppose the final thing that I'd say is just remember why you're doing what you're doing, whether it's as an analyst, whether it's a teacher. And again, I'm a massive fan of like Simon Sinek and his books and like some of the stuff that he does. just, it's a really, really basic question, but just why do you do what you do, right?
Yep.
Like, and just if you've got that passion, just keep that in your forefront of your mind.
Yep.
And for me, my ultimate passion is supporting and mentoring people to reach their potential, their ambition. That's what I do. Whether I'm in HE, whether I'm somewhere else, yes, okay, I'm in performance analysis, but fundamentally, how can I provide an environment and a level of support that ultimately I can help people do what they want to do? And it sounds easy, but it's actually quite a difficult thing to understand.
Yeah, perfect. Good answer. Good. So that, I mean, the next thing really you led on nicely was I always ask the guests that come on here if they have any recommendations for any books or podcasts. So you mentioned Simon Sinek there. Start with Why, I presume, is the one that you were hinting at there. So I'll link that.
Yeah.
Anything else, Matt? Like, and it doesn't have to be obviously sport, lads. That one isn't. But anything that you feel like other people would benefit from, podcast, books, or anything.
And to be honest, none of them are analysis, which is because again, I'm sort of really interested by people, and again, it's probably why I work in HE.
Yeah.
But the Simon Sinek stuff. So again, like start with Why. I think it's really powerful, and again, it's a way that I've been tried to instill in the students in terms of questioning everything that they do. In terms of what metrics are they looking at? How, why are they delivering it in that way? Why is that learning environment like that? Why are the coaches asking for X? Why are they communicate? So the other one is a more recent book is The Infinite Game. I don't know if you've read that.
Not ready yet. I know of it. Yeah, I'll link that below.
So The Infinite Game. A while back, I read a book which has got a really nice title. It's called Surrounded by Idiots. And it's a book around the sort of 4 general types of human behavior. Yeah. And it's like sort of, red people, yellow people, green people. And again, it's sort of, behavior characteristics, personality characteristics, communication styles, strategies. And then in terms of like podcasts, the ones I tend to listen to are things like Diary of the CEO. So again, just trying to understand people. Some of them are, so you get people from sport in there. It's Stephen Bartlett's podcast. I don't know if you've come across that one.
Yeah, watch that one. Yeah.
Obviously you got the High Performance podcast. So again, it's the sort of staple ones that you go to. And then like Fern Cotton does one called Happy Place, which again, really, really good. So again, all of them are around sort of thinking how people work or how people operate.
Yep.
And I think if we can piece that together with how we work within our disciplines and then how we can work between disciplines. But I think probably a fair few people might have suggested those already, right?
But I mean, it's because they're good, I think so. Yeah. And I think it's when people, I think this is something that students will do as well. They think they need to just, study analysis and coaching, which yes, you do need to clue up on that, but it's the psychology, it's the dealing with people, it's the communication, it's the management. Like that's just as important, if not more. So yeah, to be able to read books on that is definitely useful. So I mean, I've gone through everything I wanted to really ask Matt. Obviously, there's so much nuggets of information for students in terms of advice and kind of what to expect at uni and getting out there in the working world. Is there anything that you want to give a shout out to? We've said people can find you on LinkedIn, so anything you want to give a shout out to before we kind of wrap?
No. So it's like I say, I'm based at the University of Kent in Canterbury. You can obviously find my details on sort of University of Kent website. Feel free, people, to connect with me on LinkedIn. More than happy to offer advice, guidance, whatever it might be. They don't have to be Kent students, but if there's sort of practitioners, students that want a bit of advice or anything that we've chatted about today sort of resonates with them, they're more than happy to get in touch. And just want to say thank you so much for the chat. I hope it's been useful. Hope we have not gone off on too many tangents, and but I've really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Same, definitely. It's been really good. Well, Matt, thanks very much for your time. I will catch up with you soon, and I'll link the books down below. And good luck for the new academic year.
Cheers, Chris. Take care.
Bye-bye.